Hanukkah has a mysterious connection to the Antichrist. And you're probably asking yourself, is he kidding me? Well, no. And Jesus taught about this in the New Testament on the Feast of Hanukkah itself, when he celebrated it. Bet you didn't know that either. And today, we'll show you all kinds of things about it that you aren't going to see anywhere else. If these ideas are new to you, it may be because you've always thought of Hanukkah kind of like a Jewish version of Christmas, you know? That they're at the same time of year. It's when kids receive gifts, homes are lit with lights, folks sing crazy songs. In case of Hanukkah, it's Adam Sandler, you know. Put on your yarmulke, it's time for Hanukkah. You know the one. But it's not just a fun secular holiday. Instead, it's an amazing prophetic revelation of the end times and the most complete picture of the Antichrist in all of biblical literature. The reason we don't think of it that way is we concentrate on the traditions of Hanukkah and not the story of Hanukkah. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and a shout out goes to a member of our advisory board, Michael Tarrin, for helping us research this video. Now, let's start with a trivia question. Hanukkah is directly mentioned in the Bible only one time. Where is it? The answer, surprisingly, is in the New Testament in John 10, when Jesus was in Jerusalem for the holiday and taught about the Antichrist on that very day. Wow, I bet that surprised you. Especially if you are thinking about this like it's some kind of Jewish holiday, as opposed to one of God's holidays. It may also be mentioned by reference in a prophecy in the book of Daniel about the mysterious days of 1260, 1290, and 1335. And we're going to unpack that today as well. Okay, so what is Hanukkah? At its core, Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem after it was desecrated during the rule of an evil king, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Yes, Antiochus, Antichrist. The names even sound the same. The holiday is a metaphor for the entire end times, the coming of the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, and of course the ultimate victory by the forces of light over the forces of darkness, as highlighted in biblical prophecies. If you want to know what these things will look like in the future, knowing what they look like in the past, the Hanukkah story is key. Hanukkah is a picture or metaphor of the end times. As we said, intriguingly, Hanukkah may even hold the key to unraveling the enigmatic numbers found in the book of Daniel at the very end in Daniel 12, 1260, 1290, and 1335 days. These numbers have long fascinated scholars and believers alike because Daniel doesn't really explain them fully. What happens on those mysterious days that are 30 and 75 days apart? Most don't know, but the period between Yom Kippur, the day when most believe Armageddon will occur, and Hanukkah is precisely 75 days, matching the span between the 1260th day and the 1335th day in Daniel. Could Hanukkah represent the 1335th day? If so, well, then its role in the prophetic timeline becomes like monumental, doesn't it? Makes you think about Hanukkah differently. The events of Hanukkah are also alluded to earlier in the book of Daniel in the prophecies of Daniel 8 and 11, where a leader who was an early version of the Antichrist, Antiochus, is foreshadowed by the prophecies there. And we'll talk about that today too. But shockingly, Hanukkah is only mentioned by name, as we said, in one place in the Bible. And the only one we see celebrating it is Jesus. The Hebrew word Hanukkah means dedication. So in John 10:22, when we read, at that time, the Feast of Dedication, or the Feast of Hanukkah, took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. It's speaking of Hanukkah, Jesus celebrated the feast by going to Jerusalem for it, and he taught a lesson about it that day. We'll get to that in just a second, but first, question, why isn't Hanukkah found in the Old Testament? The reason is that the events of Hanukkah happened after the Old Testament was completed, after the book of Malachi was written. So its events are found in the non-canonical book of Maccabees. And every Jew in those days knew about those books. They were part of their school curriculum. Just like you and I studied the history of our countries, they studied their country and they studied Maccabees. So it makes sense Jesus would use the event of Hanukkah to teach about the Antichrist. And that is where we're going to begin today. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So Jesus in this Hanukkah teaching contrasts the thief, symbol of the Antichrist, with himself as the good shepherd. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, just like Antiochus, the fourth Epiphanes, whose actions foreshadowed the Antichrist's reign of terror. And he chose Hanukkah to give this teaching because every Jew of that day knew the story. They knew Antiochus. This is important because it helped the listeners of his day realize the prophecies of Daniel were not completely fulfilled by Antiochus, but someone new, just like him, was coming in the future. Antiochus' account is primarily found in the historical book of Maccabees, as we said, and also in Josephus, the greatest Jewish historian. Now, none of these books are inspired. Instead, it's history, and we should read it like history. Here is what the historical records say. Now, on the 15th day of Chislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrifice upon the altar of burnt offering. The desolating sacrifice should be familiar to you. It is the same thing as the abomination of desolation spoken in Daniel and by Jesus in Matthew. Jesus told us in Matthew 24:15 that the final fulfillment of that prophecy is still coming in the future. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. It was at this point Jesus commanded those who were in Judea to flee to the mountains. When Jesus said this, the disciples must have immediately had pictures in their mind of the abomination of Antiochus and the loyal Jews at the time who fled to the mountains to fight back against Antiochus. There would be a dual fulfillment. Antiochus was just a foreshadowing of what was to come in our eventual lifetimes. And this type of dual fulfillment continues throughout the entire Hanukkah account. This is what makes the Hanukkah story so important to us today. It is a template for the Antichrist and the Great Tribulation. And as you're about to find out, there are some amazing things in the Hanukkah story not found in prophecy. If these things also happen, well, this gives us great insight by knowing this account, insight we wouldn't have strictly from Bible prophecy. So keep watching. Antiochus IV was a madman driven by greed and hubris, and he declared himself God manifest. In other words, God with us. That's what Epiphanes means. And he unleashed persecution upon the Jews, including outlawing their faith and desecrating their temple. Most likely he was possessed by some kind of demonic spirit. So first question, which one? Can we know which demon? Well, we know from Daniel 10 that a demonic principality, known in the Bible as the Prince of Greece, was coming on the world. And Antiochus was part of the Grecian Empire. He was a Syrian, but he was also a Greek. So I would guess it was that one. And since we're told in Revelation 17:8 that the beast was not, but will rise again from the bottomless pit, that makes the Prince of Greece a a very likely possibility for the demon that will possess the Antichrist as well. We discussed that possibility in this previous video, and we are putting a link down in the description. So Antiochus's actions serve as a prophetic template, let's say, for the Antichrist. Both figures are marked by blasphemy, desecration, persecution. Antiochus was a king of the Seleucid Empire in the area of eastern Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq. Will the future Antichrist arise out of that same area? Daniel 8, verse 9, seems to indicate that the little horn or Antichrist will come out of an area like that, but of course only time will tell. So how Antiochus came to power might also have prophetic implications. This is one of those things you're just not going to have heard before. You see, unfortunately for Antiochus, his dad, Antiochus III, lost some battles to the new empire on the block, the Romans. And his dad gave Antiochus to the Romans as a political prisoner. Can you imagine being given away by your dad to the enemies? This was not uncommon. Back in those days, the Romans figured that the Seleucids would keep their end of the treaty if the royal son was still their prisoner. Because, if they didn't keep it, then they'd kill the son. Might this have prophetic implications in the future for the Antichrist? Might the Antichrist parallel this story and start his career as a political prisoner of the Western nations or of Israel? A number of jihadis have been prisoners, and many of them have become leaders later on after they were released. Former political prisoners include Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He was the caliph of ISIS. Abu al-Zakwari, founder of Al-Qaeda. Yahya Sinwar, former head of Hamas, etc. All these are deceased. But there is a pattern here. Former prisoners seem to become leaders. It's something we really need to watch for. Antiochus was released and used intrigue to assume total power. This matches Daniel's prophecy in Daniel 11:21. In his place, a despicable person will arise on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. But he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom with intrigue. And that applies to the Antichrist as well as to Antiochus. So watching for someone who comes to power via cunning is another parallel. After Antiochus became king, he made Israel, which he ruled over like a Greek state. The book of Maccabees tells us that the Israelites freely joined in and became part of the apostasy. They built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the Gentile custom. They removed the circumcision and abandoned their holy covenant. They tried to become like Greeks. I think this is another one of those hidden gems in the Hanukkah account, that a very large contingent of Jews themselves were the ones forsaking the faith prior to the king coming with his abomination. Will that happen in the future with the Antichrist? Will the Jews adopt Gentile practices of a Turkish, Syrian Antichrist willingly? Well, we don't know. But we are about to find out, since the revealing of Antichrist is only 3.25 years away, likely in 2028. So many say the Jews will never accept a foreign, non-Jewish Antichrist. Well, that's absolutely not true, because it has happened before with Antiochus. And I think it's possible that it will happen again. Josephus, the historian that tells us what happened when the abomination was set up, said this, quote, "And by pretending to offer peace, overcame the city by treachery. But on this occasion, he did not spare even those who admitted him, because of the wealth of the temple, and through greed. He saw much gold in the temple. He went so as far as to violate the treaty which he had made with them. So he stripped the temple, carrying off the vessels of God, the golden lampstand and the golden altar, in the table and other altars, from Antiquity of the Jews 12:5-4. Notice that a false peace treaty kicked things off, and that greed was an overwhelming motivation in the abomination then, and could be again. especially if the treasures of Solomon's temple are recovered and uncovered and dug up in the intervening 3 years. Israel has the copper scroll, and they know where these things are in Qumran. Will they be dug up and then stolen by the Antichrist? Well, it's all possible. It's guesswork, but it's possible because it happened in the past. Josephus tells us Antiochus set up the abomination and immediately afterward began a great persecution of the Jews. He burned their Torah scrolls and condemned anyone who followed the law to death. For instance, they would put to death women who had their children circumcised and then would hang the kids around their neck. Jesus tells us in Matthew 24:21 that in the same way, after the future abomination of desolation, a great tribulation or persecution of God's people is going to break out. This time, one that's going to affect the whole world, not just the nation of Israel. As you know, Israel fought back under Judas Maccabee. And although they were greatly outnumbered, they finally defeated Antiochus and rededicated the temple. And it's that rededication that's celebrated in Hanukkah today. Back in the days of the Maccabees, this is how the cleansing of the temple was described. And they cleansed the sanctuary after the abomination. They deliberated on what to do about the altar, though, which had been profaned, and they thought it best to tear it down, lest it bring reproach upon them, for the Gentiles had defiled it. So they tore down the altar and stored the stones in a hidden place on the temple hill until there should come a prophet to tell them what to do with them. So probably somewhere, these original stones still exist. Will Jesus help them find them? And then will they be used in the rededication on the 1335th day? We can only guess, but the stones likely still exist. As you know, there is a legend of them only having enough oil for 1 day, but the oil lasting 8 days as well, that God miraculously provided oil for them, although this isn't recorded in Maccabees or anywhere else in history. This story is the basis, of course, for the 8-candle menorah Jews and some Christians light on the 8 nights of Hanukkah. In the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus told us having enough oil for their lamps is exactly what determined the difference between wise virgins and foolish virgins. So personally, when my family celebrates Hanukkah, we stress God's provision of oil, the Holy Spirit that keeps us faithful in times of distress, both in the parable of the 10 virgins and in the future. We don't stress the rabbinic legend. I bet you'd like to learn more about the parable of the 10 virgins. Click right here to keep watching and discover that the virgins didn't carry lamps, as we're often told, but something else much more brilliant. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.